Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Sam Knowles. And joining us today is Elizabeth Press, the creator and owner of D3M Labs, the data-driven decision-making blog. Elizabeth is an experienced data leader, having held data and business intelligence leadership roles with a variety of different businesses in Europe, particularly in Berlin, including more than 5 years with Dell, and the same period running her own consultancy. Now, Elizabeth started her career as a journalist, and it's to these roots that she's returned with the data-driven decision-making blog. Elizabeth, welcome to Data Malarkey.
Thank you, Sam. And thank you for the nice introduction as well.
Good. Well, listen, I trust it's a good summary of who you are and what you've done and what you do today. Is there anything that you'd like to add or anything that I've got particularly wrong?
I will add that between D3M Labs 1.0, that's the consultancy, and D3M Labs 2.0, which is the blog and data community, I did have a couple of years as a data leader, as a head of business intelligence and director of data at certain startups and scale-ups in the edtech space in Berlin.
Fascinating. So I want to talk about data leadership and whether companies are kind of fit for purpose in that area, if they know indeed what they're asking for. We'll come to that in a bit. But before we talk about data, which I know is an obsession of both of ours, I wanted to go a little bit beyond the CV and start with a question designed to get to the heart of you. And it doesn't necessarily ask us to tell you about your job. So can you tell me, Elizabeth, how do you spend your time?
How do I spend my time? So if I'm blogging or I'm working as a data leader or I am just being me, it's maybe 3 different ways to spend my time. So I will start with blogging. Blogging is actually a very social activity because I go out and I talk to the people who I interview. I try to go to events and understand the lay of the land and get the topics. And then I go and I write. I also have a lot of planning. There's a lot of operations in my blog because, as people have noticed, I do produce a lot of content in a very small amount of time. So I do try to maximize my efficiency. And therefore, I have my content calendar and I have a process for editing the blogs, doing the SEO and all of that. So and there's also a bit of a learning curve for me in terms of all of this. And so that's what I do when I'm blogging. And then there's the community leadership aspect of this where I'm planning events and sending out the email and asking people for, if they want to participate in the newsletter and events and just helping people. So that's also very social. As a data leader, there are aspects of that I also see in my data leadership role, and that is talking to stakeholders, talking to the team members, and just aligning people on the business needs and running the data business within the business. And we'll talk in depth about that. And there is also the editing, looking at people's slides, at people's work and making sure that things are human understandable, which we're going to talk a lot about. And when I'm just being Elizabeth, I am doing things such as I like to sometimes rest because I'm quite busy. So I do, I'm not going to lie. And I do sometimes veg out and just sort of like read a book or watch TV. I do like fitness. I like photography. I like jogging. And so that's what I do.
Very good. Well, I mean, listen, on the day that we're recording, I've just received the latest edition of your newsletter. And you're right. It's packed with a lot of information, a lot of different types of content. So I can see that that'll keep you very busy indeed. Now, can you sketch out for us from your own experiences as a data leader and from those that you speak to now for the D3M blog, what's it like to work as a data leader in the 2020s? Is it a role that's appreciated, understood, and well integrated in modern businesses, or is there something to be desired there?
I think I think there's a lot to be desired. And I am not just talking about my experience, and this is the strength of the community and being a blogger, is that I could talk from many people's experiences. And there's a lot of frustration there. And I think there's a lot of frustration on the business side. we've just come from a lot of layoffs, okay, in the data teams. And that is showing how well integrated data teams are in the business or not, if they're getting laid off when, people need to get laid off. Who gets cut? A lot of data people. So, no, it's not well integrated. And this is a large inspiration for my blog, that most data teams are holes of money that are holes in the water where you throw money into. I grew up as a sailor, and that's what people say about boats. And unfortunately, it's the truth about lots of data teams, and that there's also a lot of attrition in the data team. So there's a lot to be desired in terms of getting value out of the data. And I'm talking about financial value out of the data for companies, as well as creating a fulfilling work environment for the data professionals. And so I don't think that data is well integrated. And we could talk a lot about that in the podcast, but the main reasons is, I think that data people, this word, data people, we're a tribe unto ourselves when we talk about data, and we love talking with each other, and we find our profession interesting and fascinating, and that's beautiful. But what's not beautiful is that we don't communicate that well to the outside world. And, at best, we snob people. At worst, we're getting fired en masse and, getting all of the social consequences that come from getting fired en masse.
And so is that a consequence of data people and people who aren't data people in business kind of being separated by a common language? They may speak technically the same language, but actually, when it gets down to nitty gritty, they don't know what each other is talking about. Do you think it's a communication fail?
Yes. I think it's a communication fail, as well as a planning fail, as well as an understanding that data is actually a business function and not a technical function fail. So I think actually that last part is probably the core of the sickness, and everything else might be a little bit of the symptoms.
And what, as a data leader, leading a team of these data people, I'm seeing a kind of tribe emerging here. Leading data people, what kind of challenges have you faced? Do you see those that you talk to for your blog facing, in terms of making sure that the data they get from the business is usable and intact and clean? What kind of challenges do you face as a data leader?
Yeah, so I'll put those in two categories. To be business driven, the cost side and the return on investment side. And in the cost side, I see that there's a lot of investment that businesses are making in cloud technology, in hiring people who they think are smart. And they don't necessarily invest in planning. They don't necessarily invest in product management or in communications. They just get a lot of smart people in the room often enough and think that genius scales. And unfortunately, it doesn't scale. And I've said this in many roundtables. Genius doesn't scale. It's not only about getting the best people in the room. It's not only about making the brain trust. It's about making that brain trust scalable and also understandable to the business. And so just stay on the cost side for a minute, I'll tell you what I see as just money burning practices in data teams are that you have a lot of these junior coders, or maybe even senior coders, working in a very ad hoc, very under pressure environment, making these data pipelines that are, I would say, complex, overly complex, more complex than necessary, not documented because they don't have enough time. It's a very firefighting ad hoc way to work. And then there's attrition and people don't know the complexity, and it just goes on, and you get into this endless cycle of badly designed pipelines breaking, people trying to figure out what to do, and maintenance, trying to do the work on top of the maintenance, and then people leaving, and it's just this vicious cycle. And, there's tools, too many software packages being put into a stack and people having to manage that, lack of governance. I could go on, and that's a whole podcast in itself about the cost side. But then we get to the return on investment side, and I could say that's revenue, but it could also be efficiency. It could be many different aspects that probably get to revenue or profitability in the end of the day. And then that is delivery. And that's where there's a real lack of human centricity or empathy to people who are receiving that data and understanding the context. I could say it in many different ways, but in the end of the day, the truth is that many data people are so focused on the data that they're not understanding how that data is being used. And they're not even given the time to understand, just to be fair to those people, because they are working in very ad hoc environments, firefighting, under pressure. So they often don't have the time to reflect, and their leaders aren't working in a space where they might be given the agency to say, hey, my team needs a little bit of time to plan and, go the extra mile to do the storytelling. So I think that there is a lot of investment or return on investment that is getting lost due to this ad hocracy and lack of planning. And also maybe there's not investment on the part of the data teams or the companies in the data teams to invest in people who are good at storytelling.
I think you prescribe it very well. I love the sound of an adhocracy. I've not heard that as a word before. I like it very much. I spend a lot of time as somebody who claims to be able to bridge both worlds, who claims to be able to bridge both narrative and numbers, stories and statistics, to encourage people to be more human, more empathetic, to understand what the likely data tolerance kind of either up or down, different from one's own is when having wrangled some data. You paint quite a bleak picture. There must be some companies that are doing this well. What do you believe is the best way for businesses not to burn money or to throw it into a pit of despair? What do you think is the best way to get value from data?
I think that you have to plan. You have to treat data as a product, and you have to treat data as an asset as well. So the data team is not a concierge service that's there to answer people's questions whenever one comes into their heads or when they get an anxiety. The data team is there to produce data products and deliverables that are highly impactful to the business. And just like any product on the market, there needs to be some sort of design thinking or voice of the customer. This is another one of these things that call it 10 different ways, but in the end of the day, it's telling the data team what you need and designing it to be usable. And that takes time. That doesn't just take like 2 minutes on a Slack message. So there needs to be some investment upfront in that step of the process, as well as some really good systems engineering as well. And I think that that's something that's necessary. And also this understanding data as a tech field is also a misnomer. Data is a business function, or it should be a business function. And even the way data people talk about, oh, there's the business, that's the business. It's just like another country. It's like those other people over there who don't understand us. This way of talking has to change, and the mindset has to change. If you're going to be a data-driven business, that means that data is the business, and it's not like an IT support desk or something. And you have to get business people who are savvy about data into the data functions to use the data for data-driven decision making. Next to data analysts and data scientists, and maybe data analysts should be actually business analysts. That's also something I've been saying. And people have different levels of agreeing with me on that. And then you have the data engineers who are doing the infrastructural work.
It sounds from what you're saying that there are responsibilities on both sides about data people realizing that they're in the business and those who are using that intelligence that's coming from the business. We need more. I don't know if they're simultaneous translators, but we certainly need more. Getting people to be more effective in their communication in their roles. Thinking about those who are hiring data leaders. Because clearly, I'm thinking back to some recent guests that we've had on this Data Malarkey podcast, people who have been very successful marketing leaders, for example. I can think of a number of criteria that I would look for in a modern marketeer as a result of those conversations and also much experience. What do you think that those who hire data leaders should be looking for in someone who's going to fulfill the role well?
Okay, well, let's say you're on a director level or, the person running the data for the company. This person should be a business person, not a tech person who sort of understands business because they've been working in a company for a long time. That is a big distinction because running a data function is running the data part of the business. So there should be a profit and loss sheet and the return on investment, the incremental revenue, the increased efficiency, the increased customer retention, and all of that. At one point, it translates into money. It translates into growth. So there needs to be that ability. And also the cost side. Often data leaders just don't look enough at costs. Okay. And there's many reasons for that, but you need to have somebody who has business sense enough to run a business and understand how you build a product, how you take something to market, how you understand your customer, how you get feedback and incorporate that feedback, and how you run a project, how you run a program. And those are business skills. And they could live in somebody who's an engineer, of course, but those have to be the primary skills. And too often, the data leaders people are looking for the best programmers, basically, often. And those business skills are sort of things that people see as being easy, that people could just pick up. And the really sad truth is this is not the case, that a lot of data leaders are the best programmers or the best systems architects. And okay, systems architect, that's pretty good because a lot of systems are not well architected. But still, there needs to be, this recognition that there's business. And we're talking about business and we're not talking about code. Code is maybe some components of this, but it can't be the central part of data.
You make an excellent point, and it makes me think of the world of academia. I do quite a lot of work either directly or indirectly with the world of academia. And if you look at those leaders of academic institutions who have risen up through the ranks of being a brilliant professor of physics or chemistry or economics, whatever it may be, they're not necessarily the world's best administrators. And some of the reasons that they will fall down is because they are they're excellent. They may be Nobel Prize winning potentially, but they may be at the top of their field, have the best publication records, attract the most grant funding, and not be able to manage their way out of a paper bag. So I think there's definitely the best programmers don't make the best data leaders. I'm encouraged when you talk about voice of the customer, empathy, humanity, the application of design thinking. Very much, we're very much aligned on that. Just thinking about as a data leader, what do you think are the biggest impediments in moving from kind of so what to now what, in moving from this is what the data mean to this is what the business should do as a result? Is it common failings? Is it the not speaking the same language? Or are there other things that get in the way of moving from data to insight and action?
I think it's a complex issue. But some of the main drivers are, I think, lack of business understanding on the data side. That one hires, or not one, let's say a lot of people hire people who could program and for to be data analysts. And you go to any of these data analyst courses, and they're actually computer courses. They will teach the Python code to do churn analysis, but that's not business. That's understanding cookbook Python code. And I don't want to down it in any way, but it's not business. And this really, it gets under my skin in a way that it's like a cookbook code. And, it is challenging to do this in a good way and also in a high pressured environment. But if that is the focus of what a data analyst is, then we're losing something here. And that's really the problem, is that these data analysts are supposed to be translating data into sense for business and insight. And people are spending their time doing code or fixing code or trying to learn how to code and looking on the internet and sort of even doing bad code. I'm sorry, but it's sort of the case. And then fixing that bad code, and they're not doing the insight. So it's this sort of vicious cycle, and people don't want to break out of that because there might be some sort of intellectual curiosity or technical purity, to do something difficult and master it. But that's not adding value to the business to work like that. And we need to get people who are business people, I think, people who've studied business, who understand business, and enable them to use low-code, no-code tools actually to do that analysis. I think that that's the best way forward. And instead of teaching people some cookbook code, get those people who have a business education and teach them to use the low-code, no-code tools. Teach them about data and how data goes from ingestion into the company and goes through, the different stages to the decision making. Teach them that, and teach them how to create their analysis using human understandable, natural language tools. There's a lot of that coming into the market. So I think that that's the way forward.
That's a really interesting observation about the use of natural language tools. I'm particularly interested in combining. I call myself a data storyteller, in combining narrative and numbers. Do you think that? What do you think is the best way for those who are crunching through data, making sense of data? What do you think is the best way for them to inform the business about what that means, in terms of joining together the numbers and the narrative? How can they best blend those two often unmixable areas?
I think it's the art of storytelling, and that's its own art. And I would love to have business analysts. When I started doing this, when I was a younger person, I was a business analyst, and I was schooled in how you create slides, how you do all this stuff. And I won't say I'm perfect at it, but there was a lot of education around the pyramid method about how you create slides. And if you talk to management consultants, it's like an art, a science, and a religion of how you create these slides. And a lot of that is how to translate data into impactful storytelling. If you go to McKinsey or whatever, they are going to, have a lot of opinions about how you do that. And they are impactful in companies. I know people have a lot of opinions about these companies, but they are impactful and they are good at communicating. And I think that this is not something that is necessarily part of the culture of the data people, because of what, this code is the culture. So, and I think it's also just understanding that not one person is going to have all of these skills. You have these analytics engineers now, and that is that's like between the data engineer and the data analyst. So it's putting the business logic and the different definitions into the code. So doing this technical part of being a data analyst now. So it's like translating business logic into SQL. Okay. And I think that that's actually good because that will free up time for business analysts to actually do the storytelling and actually really super duper focus on what, business analysts or management consultants at McKinsey and all these companies do.
I think you make a very good point. One of the things that frustrates me when looking to work with individuals or teams or indeed whole organizations is that they believe data storytelling is data visualization. And I think any amount of brilliant data visualization, which is a very important way because not everybody responds verbally, it's a very brilliant way often of summarizing what the data might mean. My concern and some of the pieces that I've helped to pick up over the years have been that people are an absolute whiz with Tableau or Power BI or any of the packages that are available. But that's where they go first. That's where they go first in order to find out what the data mean. Which, I know that plotting data can suddenly reveal something. It can reveal a J-shaped relationship that you didn't know was there before. I completely get that. I've been a research psychologist, so I know the temptation to do that. But I think that dashing in to use a data visualization tool or suite of tools is the same as saying, right, we've got to go and pitch for this piece of business tomorrow. I'm going to, or next week or next month. If you were McKinsey, it would be next week or next month. We've got to go and pitch for this piece of business. And what we're going to do is we're going to solve the problem that they've got, and we're going to use the tools that we've got. And my first point of call is to open a new PowerPoint deck using a template, or even worse, open an old PowerPoint deck using a template for pitching to somebody else, and we'll make the story around that. So I think you're absolutely right that this using being expert in a particular thing, data visualization does not make one necessarily an expert in storytelling. Now, there was when we were talking before we started recording this, a couple of weeks back, you talked about data having a human centricity problem. And I know that you've touched on this already. Could you unpack that a bit more for our listeners about what you mean about this human centricity problem?
Yeah. So in really simple terms, a lot of data products and deliverables are not easy to understand. And this is even, when I come in as a new data leader, I'm always looking at what a team delivers, and I'm trying to see if I understand it. And often I don't. Okay. And a lot of people don't, but they're too afraid to admit it. And it's what is it? Understandability, that people use acronyms, that people just make things that are visually not understandable to most people. It's findability. It's usability. It's what, product people are often very obsessed with, in the design and the usability and all of that. That is a lost art on data. And, a lot of data deliverables or, dashboards, sometimes you have to click like 10 times to get the dashboards, and, it's really hidden. And then you have the people, the stakeholders who are like, oh God, I don't know, where's that link? And there's no central place to find it. So they go on Slack, hey, what's this dashboard or that dashboard? Or you have like hundreds of dashboards, and the people don't know if the dashboard's abandoned or not. And it's just the landscape of how things are delivered in so many organizations is so messy and so unusable. It shouldn't be a surprise that people aren't using them, because it's a mess. It's like finding, it's like if you go into someone's closet and all the clothes are all over the floor and you're supposed to, get dressed in 5 minutes, this is going to be a really difficult task, and you're probably not going to look that good. It's the same thing.
Very good. Now, what would you say, either in your career at first hand or in observing in the public domain or in other businesses, what would you say is the worst misuse of data that you've ever come across?
I think that it's not one terrible misuse of data, and there's a lot of misuses of data. It's I think the danger is in habits. And I am very afraid of the banality of evil. And this is something that came to my attention, I think, early in my career when I was doing credit rating models. And I was talking with a colleague who also was very interested in social issues. And he was the one who was talking about, well, we're doing credit rating models. This is something where we could model some really evil things into these credit rating models that have terrible impacts on people's lives. What if you start putting, people's religion or their sexuality or some other thing, and then people don't get credit. They don't get, they don't get access to money, to homes and all of that. Or, their businesses don't get credit lines, and, people have employment impacts because of that. So the most banal things that you could do in an office looking at data, just being scientifically pure, could have awful impacts on people's lives. I've had similar discussions with colleagues who've gone into healthcare in America, looking at diabetes drugs and the pricing of diabetes drugs. On someone's computer, the pricing of a diabetes drug and trying to get the optimal price in the United States healthcare system on your computer, that might be a really harmless task that has terrible impact for people. And, the price of diabetes drugs and other drugs for chronic conditions in America is a huge social problem. And I can go on and on to other countries where you could imagine use cases having terrible impacts.
Yes, I think those that have made headlines internationally have been typically things like the Chinese citizen score, for example, a kind of a formalized digital way of what happened actually particularly under the Stasi in East Germany in the 50s, 60s, 70s. But no, I think your phrase, the banality of evil, is a very powerful one. It makes me think of I don't know if you're familiar with the recent TV series Severance, where people have their consciousness of when they're at work and when they're at home severed. And all they're doing all day is reacting to numbers on old-fashioned computers. And we have no idea what it might be that they're doing. Sounds to me as though that may be more documentary than fiction. Now, I have a Columbo question for you, as we like to say. Is there any way in which you work with data, or any views that you have about data that I haven't asked you, that I should have asked you?
I think that you were very comprehensive in your questioning, so thank you very much. My question to you is, what didn't I say, or what have you seen in your career looking at data people and their faux pas and communicating that I didn't mention? Is there one horror story that you could think of that just didn't fit into any of my examples or points?
It's a very good question. I haven't got any particular horror stories. Your banality of evil phrase makes me feel the misuses of data that I've observed have been really relatively trivial. But one of the things that I really reflect, and you coming from a different perspective, from a perspective both from a journalistic perspective, but also from the practice of the data leadership question, is that this inability to bridge the world of narrative and numbers, this inability for those commissioning and those hiring people who have very special skills, that are in massively short supply, in huge demand, meaning that they're therefore willing to pay kind of, rock star, soccer star salaries in order to acquire data people. That, on the one hand, will solve the problem by throwing money at it. You're talking about data being a department that burns money, and at the same time, sometimes the relentless focus of data people to want to solve that problem in an elegant way, or to focus not on the business consequences. That to me has been a real eye-opener. Your coalface experience there, that has been a real eye-opener. And indeed, I know that this is something that you touch on regularly. So obviously in the show notes, we will include links to your D3M blog, the Data-Driven Decision-Making blog. Is there anywhere else that people can find you online?
I am generally very active on LinkedIn. I am also on Sing for business. You could look at my blog and the newsletter. So I have a monthly, and we'll see what the cadence is going forward, the monthly newsletter. And, we have Stammtisches, regulars tables here in Berlin, and online events to exchange ideas. So
very good. Well, when your newsletter came in this morning, I was thinking, I'm going to have to make sure that I coincide a trip to Berlin to be with one of those. They look very good indeed. Elizabeth, thank you so much for sharing your approach to using data smarter, to data leadership. I think it's fair to say that if there were more people with your pragmatic and joining the chasm or crossing the chasm approach to using data, there'd be rather less malarkey in the world of data leadership and rather more data common sense. Elizabeth Press, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much, Sam, for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Data Malarkey, the podcast about using data smarter. To find out what kind of data storyteller you are, why not take our data storytelling scorecard? It takes just 2 minutes to complete and will give you a personalized report right away. Visit data-storytelling.scoreapp.com or follow the link in the show notes.